Sarah. Good morning. I think the kids can be dismissed, right? To Sunday school? The kids are in here today. Disregard the last announcement. Okay. Hey, it is really nice to be here this morning. I am very appreciative of Pastor Mike for inviting me and entrusting me with the message this morning. I'll be honest, I get a lot of guest preaching opportunities. I'm very privileged to do this, but to do so in Advent is really rare. And so I think what you guys are doing, Mike and Gateway, to go up to Cumberland and to serve another body as you are is to be noted. It's a wonderful gift that you're doing for them, and I'm aware this is a rare privilege for me. I'm going to share something a little irreverent, perhaps, when I start. Thinking about Advent, as I was planning for this message, and Mike and I had talked about Advent and what he was looking for, and I sat down and praying and thinking about what I could bring to you this morning. Excuse me, I recall some of my days as an acolyte in my little church in Parkers Prairie, Minnesota, 884 people, and I was one of the acolytes. I think when you were turned 11 or 12, they asked you, and no one turned them down. And I loved it because it gave you an important job on Sundays. And it made me think of Advent because I recall one of my best friends at the time was a crazy guy named Lee. He's got an astounding laugh. And we'd go up and we'd light the candles on the altar. I think there were 6 or 7. And when we'd come up and snuff them out, with the bell at the end, Lee would always race to see who could snuff them out the quickest. And he always thought it was a race. And I'm like, no, let's do it in synchronous, Let's do it together. No, I'm racing you, man. And but we always would flip a coin to see who could light the extra candles, the Advent candles. And it was such a special thing to walk towards Christmas and note the birth of Christ, even at that irreverent age of 12. So I'm very grateful to be here, and I'd like to pray very briefly, and we'll get started. Thank you, Father, for this time and place and the season of Advent in which we can look to, prepare, and celebrate the birth of Christ. I thank you for the privilege of standing here today. I seek your blessing on Mike and his team as they serve elsewhere, and I pray now that these words that you've given to me would empower, strengthen, and direct this body and the plan that you see for them. Amen. You have probably heard people at one point or time say, I'm going to do this. And they come up with some kind of big goal. I mean, maybe you know someone that said, I'm going to write a book. I'm going to start a company. I'm going to create something that does this. Or I'm going to figure out a way to make this happen. And I'm sure you've heard something like that over time. And you probably say, wow, go for it. Cool. God bless you on that, man. And you may even give a little prayer and just hope for the best. But I also think that in those situations, you've probably heard somebody say something that seems so far outside your experience of them, and perhaps even the realm of possibilities that you're thinking, well, I'll say something nice, but I can't really believe that's going to happen. It would be great if it did. You may not share all of that, but you'd be pleasantly surprised if they pull this off, but you're not really sure it's going to happen. Now, I think it's kind of human nature to say something like that. I don't see that as a lie. It depends upon, I think, the context of your relationship with them. And again, I've seen people, I've said, yeah, God bless you. I hope that works. Wow, I wonder if it will, but I hope it does. But then given perhaps the intimacy and the level of relationship you have with them, they may come to you and say, would you help me with this? And they may be asking for some amount of support. You know, I'm going to be away. Could you fill in and do something? Could you take on some responsibility? Would you get involved or perhaps even be financially involved? And when that comes up, then you're going to really want to be truthful, aren't you? You're going to want to say, well, okay, could you tell me exactly why this is necessary? What this will accomplish? What are your resources? What prioritization do you have in your time schedule? I know you're busy in this. And so you would inquire further to see if and how this might happen. Then you would decide if you're in or not. Maybe you have been one of those people who came up with this wild, seemingly to others, wild idea and said, I'm going to do this. I was here last week when Mike brought the message of love for the second weekend in Advent, and he asked me to speak on joy this Sunday. I'm going to admit that as we look towards Christmas, joy is predominantly associated with the wonder and realization that God has given us an answer to our sin. That Christ, the perfect sacrifice, and again, recall, if he had any sin, he couldn't take mine. He had none, he can take mine. It's amazing when I've explained that to people who've never really heard it that way. Oh, that's why. The perfect sacrifice given for us, and through faith we have salvation, and in faith we can be infused with his presence and spirit and live differently. That is the predominant sense of joy as we look towards Christmas. But, as you'll see in our passage today, the word appears, joy, in some other way. And as I look at this text, in an event that happens just prior to the birth of Christ, and the response of one, not both of these people, and what takes place, their response of joy that is evoked within her, I just really felt burdened and intrigued about this contrast between these people, and thought I might bring it to you today. Because I would hope I'm looking at a room full of people who've had some sense of accomplishment in your life. If it's relational, personal development in your faith, career, academic, sports, there could be a hobby and a craft that you do. I would think each of you has had one and more accomplishments in your life. I also believe, having talked to Mike and been here, that I'm looking at a body of people who understands what it means to take on a call and serve God and sense the joy in that. That's different, isn't it? We're going to look today at two people who are presented with an opportunity to serve God. And we're going to see very different responses in them. And I hope that it speaks to you, because I think it's a very important lesson. And I think it's very important that you listen today, because one of the things that I'm intrigued with as a pastor is, I'll admit, statistics. Now, what do we call it? Saber analysis. For sports, we can crunch all these things now with computers in the last 20, 30 years and see all these trends. And we can do this in business. We can do it with the ecosystems and the environment, all kinds of things. Well, we also do it in ministry, because now we've been able to look at, and I know Tom Rainier has written some things on this and others, is we can see aspects within church vitality and growth, and we can see things that can be tied to church growth, vitality, and so forth. And these sometimes are correlational, sometimes they're causative, but it's fascinating to see these. I was here last week and I'm here today, and I looked around and made a quick count of who's attending, and statistically, it's really cool. Church statistics tell us that in a group this size, within the next year, one of you is going to attempt something absolutely mind-blowing for God. One of you is going to attempt something that you just don't see now, maybe your family and friends don't see, but you feel called to attempt for God. Wow. Are they up front? Or maybe they're in the back. On this side? What age? Is it a man, woman, youth? Who is that person? And when they declare what they believe God is asking them to do, what's your reaction going to be? Whoa, what if that person's you? What if that person called is you? Well, we're going to take a look at two people who are presented with an amazing opportunity and very similar assignments and very different responses. One of them I think you're fairly familiar with. The other perhaps not as much. I'm in the chapter of Gospel of Luke, looking at chapter 1. And this is the time before Christ's birth. Herod is let's just say he's the local puppet ruler. He and his family had ruled this corner of Palestine. The Romans came in extending the empire, and he basically said, look, I better make a deal with them or I'm out. And so to live, he said, hey, I'll help. And they were glad to have him oversee this frankly dark and dusty corner of the empire. They obviously wanted to hold sway over it, but to have Herod take it for them, and he made an arrangement, and he's propped up by them. And at this time, again, there's been 400 years of silence at the end of the Old Testament to the appearance of Christ. 400 years, and yet we have worship taking place at the temple in Jerusalem by who? The Levites, the Levitical priests. As you recall, there were 12 tribes. One of them selected from Levi, the Levites, to be what? Dedicated to serving God, to administering the worship, the sacraments, and all the traditions associated with worship by God's chosen people, the nation of Israel. Now, they had been unfaithful and conquered, taken away, first the northern, then the southern tribes, by the Syrians, the Babylonians. But now as but they are gathered there, and still Herod has power, and the Romans over that, they're still allowed to worship. And as we see clearly as Christ appears, that it was a fairly empty and dead spiritual life that many people had, but I believe there were some who were fervent and faithful. And it seems as though this man, Zechariah, was one of them. A Levitical priest. Now, I did some research on this, and it tells me that there were 24 divisions within the Levites. Each division had 750 men. That's 18,000 total. And we find out that Zechariah is chosen by lot. They believed and saw God is reaching in, and not randomly picking, but through this choosing by lot, that he would take and draw someone to a particular purpose. And at this point, it was Zechariah. Now, I don't recall, I think it'd be easy to find out how long the period of assignment was for this man to be in the temple, to be burning the incense at 9 a.m. and 3 p.m. as people gathered outside. But he's alone in the building, solitary, working, doing what he's supposed to be doing. And I think it'd be fairly common, more common, for people not to be selected for this. So this is an extremely privileged opportunity, a rare role, and we find him in the temple. And I'm in Luke chapter 1. I'm going to read from the NIV. I hope that translation's very similar to yours. I saw